Welcome back. Thank you very much for staying with us here on SABC News. As promised, more of a discussion on the education department in terms of the Eastern Cape, where there's been a rise in cases and concerns over a surge in COVID-19 cases, especially amongst learners in the province. At least 89 schools have been confirmed to have registered cases, with the bulk of them being in the Nelson Mandela Metro, followed by the O.R Tambo District municipality. The department has committed to tightening its monitoring systems in order for academic activities not to be affected. Let's now hear from education unions on these latest developments about the increasing COVID-19 cases in schools in the Eastern Cape and in KwaZulu-Natal. We now bring in NAPTOSA'S Executive Director, Mr. Basil Manuel. It's always a pleasure to see you, Mr. Manuel. Thank you and good afternoon. Thanks for joining us here on SABC News.
Good afternoon, Flo. Thanks for the invitation. Always a pleasure to be with you.
Fantastic. What do you have to say to this the increases, the reaction really from the union in terms of the increases on COVID-19 cases in schools? I mean, the last time you and I had a conversation, we spoke about the non-negotiables. I remember it was during the time that learners were sort of returning back to school and learners and teachers were returning to school. And we spoke about the non-negotiables that would be tabled to the Department of Education. It seems that none of this was actually done, considering how these numbers have spiked in schools.
So it goes to two different issues.
Yeah.
The one being, of course, that the provinces seem to be seeing a rise in community infections, and schools being part of the broader community, it stands to reason that in schools the infections would rise too. However, there are concerns in schools themselves. Schools are overcrowded, and simply just drilling down and coming to numbers is actually misleading, because one child is in touch and in close proximity with 30, 40 other children. So it impacts on many more than just one or two children. Even though officially the statistics will show that 2 children were infected, it actually affects 60 or 70 other children. And we are worried about this. It is not so much that schools are not trying to keep children safe. It is that the conditions prevent them from doing so.
Yeah.
Conditions such as the overcrowding, conditions such as the water issues, and all the other things that we've highlighted over time. KZN and Eastern Cape particularly are seeing a lot of increases in numbers, and as a result, impact on either the whole school or classes only.
Yeah. I previously asked a question from, I think it might have been the Department of Education in KZN about, specifically about the issue raised here, which is the overcrowding in classrooms. And I raised the issue of mobile classes. I'm not sure I got a satisfactory response. And I wonder if you have in fact engaged with the department in terms of the issue of mobile classes. Why are we not seeing more of that? Why are we still talking about overcrowding in classrooms when this issue of mobile classes should have been long addressed? What responses are you getting at this stage?
Flo, let me agree with you. The responses are never satisfactory. In fact, we were promised before the learners returned that the classes were on their way. In fact, the impression was created that they were on the freeway at the time of speaking. That was obviously not the truth. And even now, we've seen in KZN a large number of classes delivered, of course, to schools where there were damages. But in the overcrowded schools, it has not started. And this continues to perpetuate the long-standing problem of overcrowding. We are not getting satisfactory answers. We are getting the runaround around money and so on, which are real issues. However, we cannot foresee that with COVID-19 still being with us for the next couple of years, that we're going to have normal classes if we don't attend to the core problem. The problem can't be solved by addressing the social distance and limiting that number to now 0.5, as we've heard it float around. That is not addressing the problem. That's skirting the problem. The problem is overcrowding. And unless our schools have sufficient numbers and reasonable numbers per class, we are not going to beat this. It will continue to show an increase in in infections.
Yeah, and I mean, what do we do now? I mean, as unions, you are given this mandate, and I suppose one can say the power to be able to engage with the government on behalf of your teachers and those affiliated to your union. I mean, what do you say now? Is it a case of letting it go because it seems like everyone's hands are tied at the moment? I mean, you really have to kind of wait for the Department of Education to do things as you ask them to be done, and if they don't, it's a case of, okay, what happens next?
We're playing with lives, Flo. That is the unfortunate reality. When we ignore what science is saying, when we ignore what the international opinion is about things like social distance and the optimal number of children per class or per square meter, we then playing with lives. Tomorrow we meet again with the Department of Education. Yeah. We will bump heads again. But it's like doing exercise on a treadmill, you spend a lot of energy, but you don't make any distance. And that's the tragedy. It's frustrating. Our members are getting frustrated with us. They almost get the impression that we are not trying, and we certainly are. But we are bumping our heads because we have an incalcitrant employer who is not heeding the real concerns of teachers. We need to go down to the level of teachers and see what is happening in schools. We need to face parents whose children are ill, and that is where the real issues lie.
And my biggest worry, and of course I think most of us as South Africans, the biggest worry when it comes to teachers, and we're hearing that learners are being infected with the virus, yes, but no doubt they're passing it then on to their teachers, who some of them no doubt would have comorbidities, for example. In all of this, as we talk about all the problems, and you mentioned, we're talking about life and death at the end of the day, in all of this, are you still in a situation where you are losing teachers? The last I spoke to other teacher unions, they've said teachers affiliated to us continue to lose their lives, and it's scary that we're not focused on the fact that at the end of the day we are being realistic when we say this is a life or death matter. It's not any kind of exaggeration of the issue.
So let me put it this way. Even today, I'm in Pietermaritzburg now at this moment because I was in KZN to investigate various things. Yeah. A teacher was buried today in the area where I live. And that is an indication that people are still passing away. Yeah. However, the vaccination of teachers has certainly made a big difference. But it's not a panacea that cures all and stops everything. People are still falling ill. Yeah. But thankfully, with the vaccination drive we've had, that has been hugely successful. It has stemmed the tide that we had seen in the second wave and in the first wave. Yeah. However, there are still people out there who are not vaccinated. There are still people vulnerable, and there are people who couldn't take the vaccine. So we are still worried. But we are also worried about the vaccinated, because it doesn't mean they can't fall ill. So safety remains a huge concern, and the lives of people remains a huge concern. But Flo, you touched on being infected, and then of course you go home. So the mental health of teachers, the mental health of our children is not what it should be. And we have no assistance in this regard. We pay lip service to it, but it is not really reaching the teachers where they are on the ground.
Yeah, Mr. Manuel, it's always a pleasure speaking to you, albeit the circumstances of our discussion most of the time. Thanks for giving us your time as always.
Thanks, Flo.
All right, that is the Executive Director of NAPTOSA Teacher Union, of course, Mr. Basil Manuel, talking about those increase in COVID-19 cases.